Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and this is Chasing Legends. Welcome back. Here we go, back into Adolph Ruth. But before we do, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell. Check out our website at www.legendsofsuperstitionmountains.com. Before we get any further, let's get back to the story. And then, of course, we got the search for his remains after the skull's found. So Barkley and Adams go in the mountains, and they take off. Now, confusing again is they seem to base themselves off of First Water. He's saying First Water and First Water Ranch. I think the newspapers are always reporting of them coming from town, and when they're at First Water, they're in the mountains, is their perception. Because at one point it does talk that every day Barkley and Adams would return to the ranch for the night and then go back out. Now we have to remember it's still raining, it's still cold, it's December, it's miserable. So they're probably spending a couple hours going down the trail, crossed, and they're going down into Marsh Valley, and they're searching a grid, searching an area. Now they're searching the Maricopa County side. McFadden, Maricopa County Sheriff, sent them. That's the area they're searching. And they're not finding anything. Now Barkley talked, and Tom Collenborn had a little of this, I saw. And I'm sure he had a lot more information because Tom had met Tex Barkley and he knew Brownie Holmes. And I'm sure he got a lot more detailed information. But there's a lot there where Barkley's just saying, you know, we'd been through there, we'd done a roundup, we did a rodeo down there, we'd worked cattle through that area, we never came across anything. And he was pretty sure that tree was one of the trees they'd camped by or taken breaks by. And he said there was nothing there in October, November. So he found that kind of mysterious that the skull had shown up. But he said it could be an animal, or something, brought it over there and deposited it. Well, the newspaper makes it, well, possibly the skull was left there by an animal or something, which can read completely different. So at this point, they're talking, they're gearing up. Jeff Adams is a former, I think he was two-time Maricopa County Sheriff. Now he's working as a special deputy. He puts together with Barkley where they're going to go and how they're going to do things. McFadden kind of puts him in charge, but Barkley knows the mountains. Barkley, people always forget, he lived down at the Quarter Circle U in the southern end and had the range down there as well. So because of that, he usually was searching or doing this type of thing for Pinal. So it was still kind of joint work. Barkley said of Jeff Adams, most honest man he ever met, man of complete integrity, considered him one of his best friends. Praised him all the time. Anytime you find anything about Barkley talking about Jeff Adams, it's pure praise. They went in and they started their first trips to go looking and work the area. And then the report comes back, they got to come back in because Adams has food poisoning. And who knows how he got it. I always thought it was the flu, but then I started reading carefully in the newspapers and it was food poisoning. They brought him back in and he had to go back into town and rest up and stuff. Meanwhile, Sheriff Levine from Pinal County is like, okay, they've searched, gridded out the Maricopa side. We need to start looking in the Pinal side. Now this is really close to the line. The Palo Verde tree is not that far from the line, less than a quarter mile, if that. So he's like, okay, we need to search down in our area. So he starts putting a group together. As he's doing this, he talks to Levine. Adams gets better, and then it's decided we'll do kind of a joint group because Barkley is basically associated with Pinal. They bring in Hosea Klein, who brings in Gabriel Robles to track. And then they have Pinal County Deputy Ace Gardner go out with them, and then Jeff Adams now that he's healthy. And the group go out and it's said that they're going to search until they finally find Ruth. They're not going to stop. Now, whether they're coming in and out of First Water or staying, it's awful cold and wet. So I would think even if they're out there for a day or two, they're coming back in. They're not packing in and staying out there a week because they would rather make the 3 or 4 hour ride every day than to stay out in the mountains. So they search and search and nothing's happening. They're kind of working the county line and south now into Pinal County. And one of them is they're working all the tributaries coming down from the west side and the east side into Needle Canyon. And then one of them comes up and finds some bones And I'm sure they had a few times they found something they thought was a lead and it wasn't. But this time it's like everybody come over, they start looking at it, and they start realizing they find another one. They start looking in the air, find another one here, another one there. And it's in this tributary canyon coming down into Needle Canyon. Not a big canyon, more of a royal drainage off a blacktop. And so as they start to work up, they start finding another bone, realizing this is probably human. So they need to follow it. So they kind of start working up. They probably drop the horses and start walking their way up through here, searching the ground. And about from where they found the first bones, about 200-300 yards up, they find the last resting place of Adolph Ruth. It is marked today. There's still a pile of rocks that they made. I believe McFadden had them do a memorial stone monument there. And there's other markings in the area. I've been up in that area. It's very interesting because they worked their way up and they found it. And when they find Ruth's remains, there's a number of things that, again, in the books, they say they found all this stuff. They always say what's missing. Somewhere out there, as far as we know, in those drainages in that area is Adolph Ruth's plate. Now, I don't know if it has a medical number or something and exactly what you're looking for. You'd have to look it up. That should be out there because they did not find that. But they did find his thermos. His thermos was laying on the ground. The cap was in his pocket, if I remember correctly. So he'd probably been taking a drink, put the cap in his pocket, was taking a drink when the end came. Most all his personal belongings were there. They found his gold watch. They said there was the purse that had the silver dollars had been rotted, and they didn't find the silver dollars. So those silver dollars he had might still be up there. Most of his other personal effects, all the things, the notes he made were in his pocket. A lot of stuff was very, very severely damaged because of the body, the exposure the body had had, and the fluids and things from the body affected them all. They said it smelled. And this is where it gets really interesting because the condition of the body parallels very much of those three gentlemen in Utah who came and were found out on Yellow Peak. Now, when you consider it is they went missing in July. Ruth was around June. They were both found around January. So Rick Wynn talked about it and said it smelled really bad. There was a lot of flies buzzing. But when you see the pictures, and we won't show the pictures out of respect for the family, the pictures of the site show looks almost bleached skeletons, but they're not really. And Rick said, no, it smelled horrible. He said, I could barely take it. It was flies everywhere. It sounds very similar to what they said about Ruth's skull and everything else, which is also interesting because if we go back to what Halseth said, skull was kind of greenish, smelled and all, but immediately when I got it to town and indoors and from outside and everything and it dried, the smell and everything went away and all the greenish disappeared. So that could have been more of the current exposure. So they're gathering up the bones and stuff, and I always notice it's very parallel, the story with the Utah men with this story. They do mention that the hands and feet, they didn't say the hands and feet were missing. They said the hands and feet must have been taken by, and they didn't say his feet. They said his hand, most of the bones from his hand and his boots were not there. But here's another one that I don't think I've ever seen in a book. They said wherever he was sitting in this spot. They said he'd taken off his leggings, which were more like maybe for brush, maybe for snakes. But the leggings he had on, he had taken them off, neatly folded them, and set them to the side, which gives us an indication of either he was taking an extended break or perhaps he had overheated and he was trying to take something off to help cool off. And that's why he had the water out too, was drinking the last of his water. So Ruth is there. They find that. As soon as they find the remains and they're looking at everything, it looks like he died from heat exhaustion, heat stroke, something like that. Now, there was one person on a forum who mentioned, Adolph Ruth, when he died, the reason the medical examiner put unknown for the cause of death, because they couldn't determine whether it was suicide or murder. You should work at the Inquirer or the Sun or something like that, because you know what? That's kind of ridiculous, because they don't know what he died of, because all they had was bones. They can say it's an exposure or something to that effect, but they couldn't say there was any foul play whatsoever at any given time. And that's what happens in books, is you get that in your head when you read that, and then you're like, well, there was a lot going on there. No, they bagged the bones and came out. So they find the body The body's found on the 8th, and the 9th they remove the body. Now, one other thing that's brought up is that there's a letter to Senator Hayden about them going off for a day or two, or hard ride to go look for this stuff. Actually, McFadden writes a letter, and his letter states that after they'd recovered the body and everything, Adams and Barkley went back in and searched the area that Ruth was supposed to be in to see. They found a cave, but they found it was very rough, very brushy, very hard to get to. They had a difficult time getting up to where Ruth seemed to think the mine would be or something. They found no indications of a mine, diggings, anything like that, or if Ruth had ever gotten there. Now, the reason they know this is because Adolph Ruth had a map on him. Adolph Ruth's map is a topographical map. It has a lot of markings on it. McFadden also writes to the son of Adolph Ruth, I believe it was Irwin at that point. No, it was Earl, actually. And he wrote to Earl and said, is this the map? Because he obviously sent him the map, so that kind of explains that. But he said, hey, we're sending all the effects and stuff. Here's a map. Is this a map, or does this have anything to do with the other maps? Because this is the only thing we found. And then he explains, hey, Barkley and Adams went back out there. They searched this area and couldn't find anything. We don't know what to think. We don't have a reply. We don't know what happened with that. We don't know what happened to the map, since it probably obviously went to Earl. It is very, very curious, because Irwin's stuck on the notion that Adolph had the maps with him and all this stuff, but what we get is a topographical map. We hear about that more repeatedly, more often. People always go to the profile map and say, this was found on him, that was found on him. Directions from a newspaper article by Bicknell was found on him that was probably sent to him by Sims Ely or someone like that, but that's what we basically have with him with the topographical map. We have no idea what's on the topographical map, because it went to the Ruth family and they got everything. In fact, they sent not only everything they could, whatever they wanted and whatever they could find, but, and I know there's some people say, oh, this was found or that was found. They even mentioned that the walking stick that he had found out there, a piece of probably saguaro rib, they even sent that to the family. So they sent everything. The map, everything is accounted for. It was sent. Everybody in place seems to be in agreement. The newspapers and the interviews seem to say, yeah, it was heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and that's just where it was, and that's where he was. Now, this leads us to one other thing. How did the skull get so far away? It's 3/4 to a mile away. Well, it's not really that far. I would determine it around more of a half mile from the area where the body is to where the skull is. And it's actually, the skull's up on one side of Needle Canyon, and the body was found on the other side of Needle Canyon. So quit thinking Blacktop Mesa and thinking up into White Rock Spring or something like that. Start thinking like along the trail there, and Needle Canyon, which runs kind of parallel to the trail right in that area there, just comes around by it. But suddenly realize that he's just off Needle Canyon, down south of there, close to the RP cactus, but it's not as far as you think. If you go out there, you'll say, well, it takes a little while away. If the skull was loose and animals were taking stuff, it could very easily. Trevor and I just recently found a piece of vertebrae from a cow, probably, that was on the side of a road. It was a large piece of vertebrae. It was pretty fresh. We were all over the area looking around for other stuff and all. Nothing to film or do anything with. But we never found another single bone of anything there. So we probably checked within 1/8 of a mile of where we found that bone. There were no other animal bones or signs where this came from. That's 1/8. We're talking a half mile. So down by drainage. So the skull could have been taken out or just come down the hillside, and an animal could have taken it. And now you're suddenly changing the distance. It's getting smaller and smaller to where the skull was found. And it's very likely that it just transported over a series of times, whether it's a bobcat or a coyote. They did say they found tracks of skunks and a lot of small mammals around the skull, but that was probably because of the recent rains. They would have only had the recent tracks. So who knows what deposited it. But it seems very forthright and very becoming. When you go out, and I always encourage you, maybe someday we will film from those sites, you're not far from one site to the other. and you're trying to act like, well, somehow it made it up over the mountain and across this way and down that way, 3/4 of a mile. It actually came down and went down the Needle Canyon and came up and ended up by the trail, the Palo Verde. So it's not as far as you think. Now, there's plenty of obstruction. You can't just see one to the other, because that was one thing I wanted to do in the area, is get two of us out and see and try to look at the distance. But you can go out there, look at the trail, just where it kind of starts to press away from Needle Canyon, going across Marsh Valley, and you put a pin there and then go down to that. I think it's the second drainage going into Needle Canyon south of there. And it's go 200-300 yards up, and there you got it. And you're going to realize that's pretty close. It's not as far as I thought it was going to be, which is the other thing. When you want it to be a mystery, when you want to tell these stories, you have so much room, so much time. If someone wanted to write about Adolph Ruth and really cover this material, they would write a book, 200-300 pages with the documentation and material. Just look at today. How long am I going to speak? How much material and how much I'm leaving out as I'm going just specific. We could be here for 2-3 hours if I read all the newspaper articles and all the stories and the interviews and everything on it. There's not a lot of mystery. But if you want to tell a good story, you need something, a place setting there for certain aspects. And in the case of Jacob Waltz's death, it's kind of boring to say he was really sick and then one night he died. That's boring. We got to embellish that. Adolph Ruth, he was kind of on the older side of things, and he shouldn't have been back in there in the summer, and he died. The Utah guys we have no problem with. They went out there and we're like, what were they thinking going out there in July with limited water and stuff and out exposed, and they died? Well, guess what? Same thing happened to them. They were far younger and probably in better shape than Ruth, and they ended up in the same circumstances Ruth in modern times. So, and it was very difficult to find them too. They still couldn't find them when they were missing. I remember going out there while they were searching for them with helicopters and everything, and guess what? It was a guy who went out wandering around, Rick Gwynn, stumbles across it, thought he had a good idea looking at their maps, and he found them. Well, 2 of the 3. So that kind of wraps up a lot of the Adolph Ruth. Now, I know people have questions and people will bring stuff up, but like I said, I encourage, go out, look, just look for Adolph Ruth newspaper reports. And there's an individual, I believe it's Gary Cundiff posted those. You'll find a link, and you'll find all the Arizona Republican, Phoenix Gazette, all the letters, copies and samples of handwriting. He did a wonderful job documenting putting this stuff on the internet. Gary's good at what he does. And when you start looking at it and you try to work timeline of these different things happening at the same time, you start realizing not a lot of time's passing, and sucks a lot of the mystery out of it. It starts to become fundamentally like pretty straightforward. I know Tom Collenborn never thought much other than Adolph Ruth died of natural causes. He didn't talk about it a ton, and you can tell when he wrote about it, it was just kind of like he kept to the myth, the legend a little bit. But generally, when I talked to Tom, his attitude was Ruth shouldn't have been out there. Barkley and them always thought it was just a tragedy because he shouldn't have been taken out there. He had no business out there. Barkley was hoping he would return home and get bored before the heat set in. It happens. People go out there at the wrong time of year. Something happens. Nowadays, we don't even, oh yeah, he shouldn't have been, he died of dehydration and stuff. In this case, unfortunately, Adolph Ruth died because he wasn't equipped and wasn't set. And that's what happened. So there you go. A lot of the mysteries resolved as far as I'm concerned. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you had a great Halloween. I hope you had a good time at the rendezvous if you come out. I hope everything's going well for you. Please, again, hit subscribe, hit the notification bells. Always check us out on Mondays on Chasing Legends, and we will be returning to lives after the rendezvous in the future. All right? So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Sorry I took so long on one bit of piece of Adolph Ruth, but I thought it fit the time of season and so forth. So until the next time, always remember, I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this was Chasing Legends.